Well, first of all, welcome to Idaho. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
And you know, David, we're not that far. I looked on a map. It's a straight shot to Moose, Wyoming.
That's right.
And I understand you were a DJ there.
I was. KMTN.
Okay, I wondered if it was K-hole because those are the greatest letters, station
K-hole.
call letters. It wasn't K-hole though, right?
It wasn't K-hole. I was a little worried about working for a place called K-hole. It was KMTN, the mountain.
Those are other good call
Is that how you
letters.
say it?
Yeah. Well, I tried to go as deep as possible.
So that's where the character, the mountain, comes from,
KMTN,
right?
the mountain. Well, that and George Martin.
He's from Wyoming.
But I did the graveyard shift from midnight till 6 in the morning.
And so it inspired some of the very frigid scenes in Game of Thrones. your time in Moose, Wyoming.
I guess so. And City of Thieves. I guess, there's something about snow, ice.
Snow
yeah,
and ice.
There's something appealing about it. We like going to Iceland, too. It's a fun country to work in. So we always try to come up with some more scenes set on glaciers or frozen lakes.
Does it seem a long time ago since the two of you met? It would be 20, 21 years since Ireland when you met together.
I had a lot less gray in my beard.
Yeah. I can't say that we had this in mind when we were drinking Guinness in the various pubs of Dublin.
Well, it's an
this was a
incredible
surprise.
adventure.
Yeah, it really has been. It's kind of calm. It started in Dublin, and it brought us back to 90 minutes up the road to Belfast. So it's a definite Irish theme in there.
Two Jewish guys in
sure.
Ireland getting together.
Yeah, that was the strange thing. Everyone would always ask us, one of your parents from Ireland or grandparents or something, and we were probably the only Yanks there who had no Irish connection whatsoever. Almost most Americans seem to have somebody in their family from there, nothing for us.
Something like 45% have at least
right?
like one grandparent that
Yeah.
has.
Well, I was thinking about the trajectory and also about the fact that you wrote a thesis on Beckett, and I was wondering what Beckett would think about all of this transformation and change in your life. I did find one quote that might summarize it a bit. You both have admitted that you went into this with very little experience, and there's a great quote from Worsted Ho where he says, "Try again, fail again, fail better."
Yeah,
You have that
That's
up in
pretty
your
much
house,
used
don't
that.
you?
Yeah, that's hanging in my office, and we pretty much used it, slightly askew
We ripped
version
it off.
of it
We ripped it off
for the first episode.
Davos, right?
Davos says it to John.
Jon Snow after he gets resurrected.
And Jon Snow also says there's no shame in fear. My father told me what matters is how we face it. So I imagine in this whole timeline, there have been some failures and fears.
There definitely were.
A lot of both. Still a lot of fear. We went into it with no experience in television whatsoever, and made a tremendous number of mistakes for the first year. I mean, still make mistakes every year, but I think, hopefully learning as we go and improving things. But we just didn't have any production experience, so we came in kind of knowing how we wanted to write it, but not knowing anything about the casting process, the editing process, working with visual effects, working with a production designer, all that stuff that you need to know. And it's been a steep learning curve, I'm thankful that we got a chance to do it because it very easily could have gone the other way when we started. And
I remember being in Malta when we were shooting the first season, and it was in this sort of crucible period where it really looked like everything could go badly. They weren't going to give us any more money because we already spent quite a bit, and the weather was terrible, and we was in this RV that was getting blown back and forth by these massive hurricane gusts of wind. I just remember sitting there thinking, this could be where it all ends. But luckily the clouds cleared and we got what we needed.
I think our producer at the time said this week will be our Waterloo. It's unclear at this point whether we're Wellington or Napoleon.
It really
Ignorance.
was. Yeah, it really was. Just if we had known what we would have to know to do this well, I think the intimidation factor may have gotten the best of us, but we were just filled with excitement over the prospect. We knew that done right, George's books could really be something tremendous, and we were so excited. We just kind of barreled into this situation without really knowing what we didn't know. They were unknown unknowns.
And that is key, isn't it? You picked up these books, or you were sent the books by Martin's agent. You read 1,000 pages, as I understand. Whether that's apocryphal or not, I'm going to believe that it's true. That you read 1,000 pages in a night.
I think it was 2 days.
Two days.
Yeah.
something about those books just went inside of you, just grabbed you.
Mm-hmm.
I think you said they're like crack on paper, you know, and there's something addictive.
I've never actually smoked
Yeah.
crack, so it's kind of don't know what I'm talking about. But
Well,
what I imagine crack to be like.
But I don't read as fast as Dan does, but I remember just being in my bed at home reading these books endlessly, and my wife just not understood, just being like, "Are you kidding me? You're still reading these books about dragons and ice demons? What's wrong with you?"
I've heard you say that you were attracted to the fact that there are real people in his stories living in a world of magic.
Yeah, that's what felt so groundbreaking about it. I mean, there are certain well-established fantasy tropes in the book that we've seen before, you know, the dragons and giants and demons and magic, but the characters felt like real people who just happened to live in a world where these supernatural things existed, and you know, there's something about, I don't think there's any way I could have stuck with that many thousands of pages. I know there's no way, if I hadn't fallen in love with the characters, because that's ultimately what compels me about any good story, is that I become, you know, whether or not they're good people, it's not necessarily loving them in the way that you love a friend, but finding them incredibly compelling and just wanting to know what's going to happen to them. I mean, that's sort of the key to any good writing, I think. And with George's books, it was falling in love with these characters and then watching in horror as he killed them all. You know,
And now he gets to watch in horror as you kill him
yeah,
off.
we're killing him even quicker than he did.
Because
So.
you're past.
Yeah.
you're
We
past
actually have to
him.
pay our characters, and he doesn't, so it's a different situation.
Yeah.
Well, we'll talk about that
Okay.
in a moment. But as you say, there's lots of shades of gray in the characters. It's not just good versus evil. You've got
There
good
are
people.
50
Who've got,
shades of gray.
Yeah, I was going to say not 50 Shades of Gray, but although there is the criticism, of course, that there is.
I don't know, if I hadn't said that, would we never have segued into this
We'll
question?
never know,
Oh,
will we? But yes, there's a criticism. I learned a new word researching
Sexposition.
Sexposition.
Yeah, I like that word.
There's been a criticism that to move exposition along and long monologues, you have gratuitous sex scenes going on in the background.
Who said that?
Well-
we haven't done that in a long time. It's been seasons and seasons since we've done that.
People don't like it.
Yeah.
What am I going to say? I no real interest in defending it. You know,
Yeah.
it is what it is. People.
It's one of the. It is one of those things that for every person who criticizes something vocally, for all you know, there are 10 people who really enjoyed it, but it's for whatever reason they're not putting their voices out there. So you can't. If you start listening to every criticism, it'll tear what you do apart, because the criticisms are, many of them, mutually exclusive. There are going to be people who think it's moving too quickly. There are going to be people who think it's moving too slowly. People who think there's too much violence. People who think there's not enough violence. And we make the show that we want to watch. We would want to watch if we were reviewers. So some people are going to like it, and some people aren't.
And you don't read anymore what people say online.
No, I mean, you know, when sometimes if there's a huge hubbub or it becomes like a front page story, which has happened, it's almost impossible to avoid. Or well-meaning friends will send you, say, "Oh my God, did you see this?" And you think it's going to be something great, and you hit a link, and it says, you know, something really
Senator
horrible.
Claire McCaskill says she's never going to watch
Right.
your show again
Right.
because
Wow.
she is upset by the number of rapes in it.
Right.
And that was a very strong thread in the news for a while.
We've somehow survived Senator McCaskill's defection. So, you know, I just fundamentally disagree. I think the idea that depicting a brutal crime indicates endorsement of that crime is ridiculous. And so that's all I'm going to say. I disagree.
It's arguable that the sanitizing representations of violence is more harmful than more graphic depictions of violence that make you feel the way violence probably should make you feel, which is uncomfortable and horrified. And we tried not to put it in a cartoony place, because that's not what the books did. That's not what history is about, and it just seems fundamentally dishonest to us to have violence depicted that way in a more stylized, less gritty way.
Yeah, honestly, I feel like it's an absurd criticism. I think you go back to any book that I find is memorable that deals with violent subjects, and the graphic scenes in Dante's Inferno, the graphic scenes in the Bible, they're not on screen. Obviously, there have been screened adaptations, but just because they're not on screen doesn't mean that they're not describing unbelievable atrocities. And this is a very violent world that George depicts in his world, and it felt fundamentally dishonest to us, as Dan said, to approach it without being honest to that. And that was part of our initial pitch to HBO. This is not Tolkien in a kind of sexless world where, as far as we know, the hobbits have never once contemplated anything erotic. It's just not this world. And this is a world where it's not humans against orcs, it's humans against humans, and doing horrible things to each other. And that's the story. And I totally understand that some people aren't going to want to watch that story, and that the violence level is too much for them or the sexual level is too much. But luckily we live in a world now where there's something like 460 scripted series on air every year, and there's a great variety of choice for people. So nobody's forced to watch it, and there are people in my family who don't like the level of violence and don't want to watch, and that's absolutely fine.
When you do meet somebody, well, let's just say it's your grandmother, I don't know if she's still around, but if you were to describe this series to your grandmom, what would you tell her it's about?
See, my grandmother, neither of my grandmothers are with us any longer, unfortunately. One of my grandmothers would have loved this show because she read. It was her bookshelf that had all the steamy books on it that I would sneak off the bookshelf and look for the naughty bits when I was 10 years old. I guess I would tell her it was more like she was a big fan of the James Clavell books, and I would tell her it's a lot more like a James Clavell book with bits of magic around the edges than those fantasy books that maybe she'd seen at the bookstore and walked past on the way to the James Clavell books.
My grandmothers are not around anymore. I did make the mistake of watching one episode with my mom, and it was Joffrey, the evil prince, is doing something horrible to a prostitute, and I would say, that was a definite mistake. But she loves the show, and I think obviously she's a biased woman, but it's been fun to see people like our four parents, who are all in their 70s, right? And who you wouldn't think of as fans of this kind of thing, really becoming obsessed with it and getting text from my mother with "OMG!" 3 exclamation points after some big surprising scene. It's like, Mom, what? It's when you start texting like a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
Season 6 has gotten so many accolades and amazing performances by very strong women. And there's also been the question of whether you did respond to any kind of criticism about.
Now, when we were plotting season 5, we've been talking about the end game and the end point for years, ever since we started. So all for Sansa is just one example, where she was headed, or where Cersei was headed. These were all things that we had discussed at length before writing or shooting season 5. Season 5 was the trajectories of the characters through this previous season were already aimed at the current season. So it wasn't in any way a response to it's not writing with a committee of 2 people or 4 people is something you can do. Writing with a committee of 1 million people who you poll for every decision online to my knowledge, nothing good has ever been done that way. So we really that's not how we work.
The easiest way to look at it is we finished our outline for season 6 in early February.
Yeah.
And the show didn't air. Season 5 didn't air until April of that year. So all of season 6 was mapped out in incredible detail, and we didn't go back and make changes because of criticism for it. As Dan said, everything where Sansa was going, it just wouldn't work. I think the reason this season worked for a lot of people is that things kind of clicked into place that had been set up for a long, long time, for many seasons, and it just doesn't work if every year we started fresh and thought, okay, now where are these characters going to go this year? It has to be. It's the kind of story that just needs a long-term plan.
And you guys, know where you're going. You're writing or have written
where we're
the
going.
end by now.
We haven't written it.
Close
We've
to it.
talked it over a million times, and yeah, I mean, we could write it. We know enough about it now that we could write the final episode today if we had to, and you know, so we know where we're heading, which is, again, I can't start a book if I don't know where it's going to end, and it's very hard to work on something this big if you don't have a sense of direction.
One of the things I found interesting, I really enjoyed your book. We have it here, City of Thieves, and as I thought about Game of Thrones, coming at it as a newbie, you know, and trying to understand it, it seemed a lot like a big game of human chess, which I never really understood chess that well. My brothers are really good at it, so I'd watch them, but the queen obviously is a powerful piece. And chess figures in City of Thieves as well.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if that, some of the plotting does remind you as well of a great big human game of chess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I also am not a good chess player, but I grew up with an obsessive chess-playing father who's got, you know, all his bookshelves are filled with chess books. And
I saw when I took my son to New York and we stayed with David's parents, and he has thousands of chess books.
It's another language.
It is another language, which I've never really learned to speak, but I've always been fascinated more as an abstraction than the actual game. I mean, Dan's 8-year-old son could beat me. That's not even an exaggeration.
He's pretty good, yeah.
He's beaten Peter Dinklage. We have the photographic evidence of it. So, but yeah, it's very much, and I think that comes from George's books. You know, the sense of characters trying to play each other, and there's a very specific reason he chose the title Game of Thrones. And that's why, even though it's not the title of his entire series, it's just the title of the first book, we thought it was the best descriptor of the entire show. And so that's why we chose Game of Thrones for the series title, as opposed to, I guess, The Song of Ice and Fire.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that interests me from a meta perspective is this concept of all of us having both male and female in ourselves. You have men that have very highly developed feminine sides in them, and you have women that, and I'm talking now in a classic sense, or you know, what we think of traditionally, and women who have highly developed masculine sides. You know, that there's not one or the other, which is
even on the anatomical level. You know, you look at the number of eunuchs in the show, and that's
a very eunuch-heavy show. Yeah. I think we must have more eunuchs than any show. I mean, there are literally thousands of eunuchs in the show. Yeah. So I think we win there.
I won't ask you about the casting call for that. I guess I just did. One question we had from a viewer is, what's the secret to keeping audiences tuned into a show where fan-favorite characters can die at any time?
It's had a lot of characters. As long as you have enough characters left that they like, one or two go missing.
Yeah, if they all died, it would be a problem.
Rebirth?
That helps.
Make the show a lot easier to produce.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough question. It gets to the heart of, you know, I think it goes back to the books also. It's first of all, as Dan said, there are many characters. So it's not just, you know, the first season Ned dies, but there's still a great number of characters that we love. The Red Wedding removes 4 or 5 characters that have become beloved from the board, but we still have Arya, we still have Jon Snow for a while. And yeah, that definitely helps. And I think just ultimately you just want to see what's going to happen. And there's a kind of a craving to know. And so you get that in all these spoiler sites out there, or you know, people like sneaking around near the set with these cameras trying to get pictures of the characters in costume so they can post it online and spoil it for everybody, which I don't get. Like, that's the one thing. The criticism I get, might not agree with it, but I get it. The spoiler thing, I just don't get. It's, to me, it's like, not only is it like looking at the last page of a book and learning what happened, but it's then ripping out that page and putting it on the library wall so that you can ruin it for everybody. So those are the people I don't like.
How do you keep everything so secret once you have written something?
It's difficult.
Really hard. Yeah.
You have to be real. I mean, we talked to our friend Ryan Johnson, who's just finished shooting a Star Wars movie, and we've talked to him about the way that they do a very good job of keeping everything on double secret lockdown. And you know, as we go on, especially as we come to the end of the run of the show, the thirst of people to find out what's going to happen seems to grow, which makes our job in terms of keeping the scripts on lockdown a lot harder. We've taken a lot of precautions.
How, going back to this issue of never having done this before, and being afraid and everything, how do you handle that? How do you plow ahead?
The fear part?
Yeah. Work with people who are really, really talented, who help you.
That's a huge part of it. I mean, one thing we were talking about here last night was that the television is a team sport, as opposed to writing a novel, which is a solitary endeavor. In television, we have our jobs, but there are hundreds of people around us who are very, very good at what they do and who work incredibly hard, and they take a massive amount of the workload off. And
I think we have a mutual friend, Malcolm Spellman, who's a writer producer on the show Empire, and I think the way he put it, I thought was really smart. And he said, "Don't be afraid of what you don't know." And so, if you're afraid of your ignorance and you try to hide the fact that you don't know something, pretend like you do, then you're never actually going to ask the people around you who do know the questions that you need to ask to learn about, at least some small piece of what their lifetime of experience has taught them.
How do you two work? What's the division of labor there?
For writing?
Yeah.
For writing, so once we have an outline, we'll divvy up the scripts. It's the two of us, and we have two other writers, Brian Cogman and Dave Hill. And once we figure out which scripts we're writing, Dave and Brian will write their own script individually, and then we'll take the others, and Dan might write the first half, and I'll be writing the second half, and then we swap paths and rewrite each other. And we've been friends for 20 years, so there's a shorthand, and there's also a kind of, I think there's less of a fear of offending. If Dan writes a line of dialogue that I think isn't working, I'll just write a note saying I don't think this works, and it's not.
It's just a lot. It's one of those. Also, the way that we have to write the show, which is under relatively serious time pressures. If you write 60 pages in very short order, it takes a certain kind of hubris that I just don't think we have to decide that those scenes that you cranked out really, really quickly are perfect and should not be tampered with in any way. They're not perfect ever. So.
Is it freeing now to be ahead of the book, or is that another anxiety area?
It's freeing and terrifying in equal measure.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was always a kind of a comfort in knowing, even say season 5, where we had already deviated significantly from the books. We had certain set pieces from George's novels that we knew we were heading towards, and whether it was The Walk of Atonement or something else. That's the first one that comes to mind. Season 6 is the first time where, aside from a couple scenes on the Iron Islands, it's pretty much entirely original. I don't know if original is the right word, because it's still an adaptation, obviously. It's still George's characters, but it's none of those scenes take place in the books, at least yet. So that's nerve-wracking, but also liberating. I mean, it's just different writing a scene. If you're taking a scene from a book and trying to figure out how to make it work, you're exercising different muscles in your brain than if you're inventing a scene whole cloth. And I'm mixing metaphors terribly here, but regardless, it was fun. I think it was the most fun season to write.
We'll sew it all up in
the end. Yeah. Nice.
But. Yeah, no, I can imagine it would be both. I mean, you want to remain true to this person that has inspired you so greatly. At the same time, you've got to get going. Like piles of money are burning every minute.
I mean, the ship is not gonna. It's a very big ship, and it's not gonna stop. So when we knew that going into it, we just the one thing we didn't know going into it was that we would still be around 6 seasons in, because we didn't know that going into it that we were going to be around for a second season.
Yeah, I remember saying very early on, saying, what would happen if we caught up with George's books? Because he was working on the 5th, but we still felt like we had a lot of time.
I remember when we kind of did the math and we started counting, well, this is how long he takes, and this is how long.
We said, if that happened, it's going to be like the 6th season, and if we make it to a 6th season, like, things are going to be pretty good, so... Yeah. And then it happened.
Yeah.
What has this done to the economies of places like Northern Ireland, Iceland,
I think it's been
Croatia.
really, I think especially, and we're based in Belfast, so that's where our offices are, that's where our sound stages are. And I think it's been a great thing. It's been a mutually beneficial thing. It's helped. Like, they didn't really, there were a few films that had shot there, smaller things generally, but they didn't really have a film infrastructure. And over the course of the show, the Northern Ireland screen's been wonderful in building us new sound stages, and this crew that started out just like us, many of them as the local hired crew, as people who've never done this before. Now many of them have been working constantly and trained up as very, very professional, film workers in all of their different specialties. So it's kind of, Belfast is a great place to make films now, and there's a much deeper base of knowledge amongst the local, all areas of the local crew base than there was before.
Hopefully that'll be the long-lasting impact. Is as Dan was mentioning, changing the perception of it, where I don't think people really thought that much about shooting in Northern Ireland before. I mean, there have been a few small things, but now it's a real. People really think of it as an alternative to shooting in England or shooting in the Republic of Ireland. And whereas before, if you mentioned Belfast, I think people thought of the Troubles. Now they realize that's not what Northern Ireland is anymore. I feel safer there than I do in Los Angeles, honestly, and it's much safer there. And it's a beautiful place to work. I mean, you're so close to so many gorgeous locales, whether it's a stony beach or an old growth forest or these glorious mountains, and it's all accessible, within about 45-minute drive, which is great for a film production because you're not hauling all your equipment, halfway across the state or the country or whatever it might be. So it's my hope is that the biggest impact we'll have on their economy is just that more and more productions will keep coming there even after we're finished.
It must be fun for both of you, since you met in Ireland, to come full circle and to be giving back to the country in which you met.
Yeah, well, yeah. They would say different country.
It was very different at the time, I
depends who you
understand,
ask.
in the 1990s, yeah.
We don't go there.
We're two American Jews.
Yeah, we don't know.
We stay.
We just wave the white
flag. Don't get involved.
So how much about being Jewish infuses what you do, how you write?
Well, we worry a lot.
A lot of stomach issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean,
maybe
growing up with, reading the Old Testament stories in Hebrew school, like in those, we were talking before about those bloody, horrible stories about all the horrible things.
Very few books nastier than the Old Testament. Do
you find yourself walking around in the world in which you have created sometimes? I mean, how do you, separate yourself out, for daily life from what you're writing? Or is there a big bright line and you don't carry the characters around in your head with you as you walk around, or the scenes?
Oh, they're always in there. Which is, again, I guess it's just a testament to how powerful the story is that George created, that after all this time, we pitched this to HBO 10 years ago now,
yeah,
right?
More than 10 years ago, yeah.
More than 10 years, and I can't think of anything else I've ever worked on, including my own books, that I'd want to still be in there for 10 years, and it's still not boring, and part of that, I think, is that we're getting close to the end. We've got 2 seasons left. I think if it was a kind of indefinite end, there would be a bit of fatigue creeping in, but in some ways, I think we're feeling a bit reinvigorated as we get near the home stretch, because it's like you can see the finish line out there. It's not that much farther, and we've been working towards that end for so long, and it was part of the very original, the original pitch to HBO more than 10 years ago was, what we think we have an opportunity to do here is tell a long, epic story with a real beginning, a middle, and an end, and it's not, even the shows that I've loved in the past, the TV shows that I've loved in the past, every season you kind of got the sense that they were making it up a little bit again. Like, they got into the writer's room, a lot of smart people got together, and they're like, okay, what's going to happen this year? And with very few exceptions, Breaking Bad's an exception where it felt like Vince Gilligan had a real plan from the beginning. With very few exceptions, that was the case. And so we wanted to try to tell a massive story on the only possible canvas, which is television. You can't do a 73-hour movie. Thank God.
you gave me an entree here. You like Breaking Bad. I know you really love that series. Aaron Paul's from Idaho. So I'm curious to know what you think of him as an actor and his promise going forward.
I think he's fantastic. I mean, he really, God, what he did with that character was something what many people on that show did. We can drone on about that show forever, because when it was, and we don't watch when you're making, at least, well, when we're making this show, the time requirements of making this show are such that I don't watch that much dramatic television while we're making the show, but Breaking Bad was a definite exception, and that was appointment viewing. I remember being in Croatia when the finale aired and like unplugging all the phones and blacking out it was complete lockdown to watch it as soon as humanly possible, right after it aired, because I didn't want to hear anything about it. And it was the kind of thing that we're hoping we could create in our show, that feeling of just somebody who's into the show to the point where they need to watch it right away, and that's how we felt with that show. And Aaron was so fantastic as Jesse.
Yeah, I mean, we're here at a literary conference, and even though people talk about a golden age of television, there's still literary people don't think of television as an intellectual enterprise, rightfully so, I think, for the most part. But there are certain stories that have been told on TV in recent years, Breaking Bad, The Wire, a few others, that I think belong in that same, they have that kind of depth and that kind of, brilliance of storytelling.
Well, it'll be interesting to see where he goes. He's from a very small town outside of Boise.
Aaron Paul
is. Yeah.
I think he's going to be okay. He's such a talent, and apparently we have friends who worked with him. He's apparently a real pro. And
he's one of those
guy,
people that you never hear anything but kind words about, which is not always the case.
If you're that good and you've got a head on your shoulders, you're going to be okay.
I have to ask you about your actors and watching them grow up, some of them in some instances. You have some amazing actors, not the least of whom are some young women.
Yeah.
That's the craziest thing when I'll watch scenes from the first season. I mean, you don't realize it because you're spending time with them, half the year with them every year. But you go back and you watch Maisie and Sophie in the first season and Isaac, and they were just little kids, I mean, Maisie
especially. The pilot, which was a year before.
Oh God,
we shot the first season.
I mean, Maisie looked like she was 7 years old when we started shooting, and now she's this amazing woman, and it's crazy to think that we've been doing this, and wonderful to think we've been doing this for so long enough to watch them turn into the people, the actors they become and the people they become, because they are, all of them, just absolutely phenomenal human beings.
Yeah, I think that's the part that I've enjoyed the most. And we were talking before, all these things that writers don't get to do in movies, like the casting. And I was talking to a theater director last night. Another great thing about this writers' conference is you meet all these people we'd never get to meet normally. So Kieran, who runs the Irish theater company in New York City, and we're just talking about how casting is everything. I mean, it just doesn't work if you don't cast it right. And it's so frustrating as a feature writer just to see characters that you either created or put on page from an adaptation, and they're not cast right. It might be a very good actor they put in the role, but it's just not the right person for that role. So to be able to fill these roles with people that we actually met, we could sit down with, that we knew, or as Dan said, you don't ever know for sure, but you had a really good feeling. And I just remember the first time we had already hired Maisie, I guess, and we were looking for Sansa, and we made Maisie read with Sophie as a chemistry read. Which usually they do with the man and woman in a movie, like a kind of romantic chemistry, and this was almost essentially anti-chemistry because they didn't like each other at all, and just knowing that these two that was Arya and Sansa, and then as watching them grow up, and not only are they excellent actors, but they're just really, really good young women, and we just have a. People always ask us, who's the bad egg in the cast? Like, who's the real, there's got to be someone you just don't like. Who's the jerk? And there's no one. I mean, they're just all really, truly people that I like hanging out with. We're going to Comic-Con next week. We're going to get to spend time with 10 of them. I love it. It's fun for us. And it's hard for me to imagine that anything else we're going to work on will be like that, where there's such a sense of family.
Speaking of your actors and going out into the world, you have a partnership with the International Rescue Committee. Several of the actors, including Macy,
Yes, Maisie and Lena and Liam.
were over visiting some refugee camps. Right now, both through Game of Thrones and its popularity, and that's just the two of you and what you've been able to accomplish, you have the ability to have a platform. I mean, you're incredibly successful as writers, and the series is successful. What do you hope that you'll be able to do as two individuals now with this ability that you have to speak to broader issues? What do you care about? What would you like to do and go out into the world?
Well, we were really, really glad to be involved with IRC, and we're very glad that Maisie and Liam and Lena could actually go out there and put faces to the problem, and it's something we don't really see this show generally as a political platform, but this seems like something that completely transcends politics and just goes to basic human decency and dignity. So if the show's popularity can make people aware of the work that IRC is doing, and people who wouldn't have otherwise been aware of it, and maybe goad them into helping, then it would be hard to not be happy about that.
I mean, you have the ability too, as individuals, to make a difference now with your name, your funding, your funds. It's become a larger thing than just.
Yeah. It's as Dan points out, it's a little bit of a dangerous. You have to be careful, because I think there's a degree of resentment when Hollywood people start telling people what to think about political issues and all, and I find it annoying.
I resent it when I see it.
Well, you can do it quietly too.
Yeah, we do, but I know when I see an actor in a talk show mouthing off about this or that, sometimes even when I agree with them, I'm kind of like, but you know what do you know? So
it's. I think there's some things. There are ways. There are things that you can do, ways to do it that feel right and that don't feel like us
grandstanding or
pontificating about something that frankly is not our sphere of influence. It's not our sphere of expertise. So try not to mouth off about things that aren't our sphere of. Like IRC was Bono's Red campaign, which we helped with as well. That was something that just transcends partisan matters,
You could have your pick of things to do after Game of Thrones. You're, as I understand it, moving into an adaptation of Dirty White Boys. What attracted you about this an interesting project? What attracted you to that?
The first line of the novel, which our
not allowed to say on PBS.
Could not say that on PBS. But our friend Scott Frank is a wonderful writer and director.
We should say it has racial.
It's got that. It's got genitalia. It's everything that could be wrong about a first sentence is this. But it's a brilliant writer named Stephen Hunter, who was for a long time the Washington Post film critic. I believe he won a Pulitzer for his film criticism. Started writing novels. And this is, I think, part of the attraction. Part of the attraction is just a very, very good book, and part of it was that it's almost the anti-Game of Thrones in terms of
people on cars with T-shirts.
Yeah,
live in houses, not castles. They don't.
No horses.
They don't ride horses. They don't have swords.
I really liked horses before we started working on the show, but they
I love the way they look.
Don't take direction well.
I love the way they look when it's all done.
How about those dire wolves? Do they take direction pretty well?
No, terrible. Probably worse than the horses.
Wolves kind of just do what they want. We have the wolf trainers are really, really excellent, but they're wild animals, and they're you can't train a wolf to do the things you can train a Jack Russell Terrier to do. It's just literally not in their DNA.
And you can't ride them. So we have these amazing riders led by Camilla Napus, our horse mistress, and the incredible things they can do. Not only incredible to look at, but also that no one gets hurt, the rider or the horse. And with a wolf, it's you don't have that kind of human-wolf interaction.
We can't really have people interacting. Well, first of all, the wolves need to be blown up, scaled up with visual effects to like about half again as big as they are. So the wolves are, and for safety reasons, the wolves can't be in the same space as actors. So it makes it every wolf shot you see is a visual effect.
You realize I've made it through this whole interview without saying the word dragon.
Oh, you have.
Oh, nice.
No, I haven't.
You've blown it.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I blew
there
it.
it is. Dragons
Yeah.
and dragons.
Dragons are easy.
Yeah, they do whatever you tell them.
Yep. Yep.
We should have more of those, right?
Yeah, dragons. You just sit in a room with a bunch of computer genius guys, and you say, "Well, could we get a little bit more sun glint on that wing?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure." And
Say, could he do this with his claws? And then he does this with his claws. Whatever
You're
you
going to
want.
miss the dragons.
I will. It's been fun watching them grow up too. To be honest, they were these little cute things, and then every season they sort of just double and double again. And the ones we just saw actually today, the scale representations of the final size season 7 dragons, and they're like the size of like a DC-9. They're huge, and it's going to be. It changes the way you shoot them. It changes every time they scale up. It makes it a different. They play differently in scenes and in shots. So that part's really fun.
I imagine this series has advanced things technologically in the field as well.
In the field of dragon making, yes, it's definitely. We've made great strides.
Well, I don't think we could have made this show 15 years ago. You know, just the quality of the VFX, for them to be able to do it on the budget. We have a large budget, but still a TV budget, and the time that the VFX guys have to make it in, and it's astounding. And it wouldn't have been possible. Even when we started the show, it wasn't possible to do the things that we do now. And every year it gets better. And luckily, it's sort of gone in sync with our story demands, because the story gets bigger and the dragons get bigger, and the battles get, Battle of the Bastards. We couldn't have done that 2 years ago.
No, it just wouldn't have. It wouldn't have been possible to do Battle of the Bastards, especially. I mean, those are what the guys, what Steve Callback and Joe Bauer and their team did. There, I would be framing through shots, and I couldn't tell which horses were real and which horses were CG horses, because a lot of the horses were full CG horses. It's like the ones that are smashing into each other. You can't do that with horses. So
Ultimately, when people watch the series, is it entertainment, or do you want them to be seeing something deeper, reading something deeper into it?
Well, hopefully both. I mean, I don't think people would stick with something for 60 hours if they're not entertained, because otherwise it's just too much broccoli.
I think we always kind of said that we didn't want to make a spinach show, and we didn't want to make a popcorn show. We kind of wanted to make a steak show. It's something that you don't need to. So nobody needs to force you to eat your steak.
Well, if you're a vegetarian, you might.
I actually am a vegetarian, so it's a weird metaphor for me.
Like, what would it be, a tofu show?
But
or?
that doesn't.
That doesn't.
It doesn't work. Fish show, that also doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work.
Steak is the only metaphor that really works.
But I guess for me the thing, because there are millions of people watching now, and it's going to be different for every single one of them. But for me, what I hope for is endurance. That people still watch it and think about it and talk about it after it's done. And that it lingers in people's minds, and it's not just one of these pop culture phenomenons that's a big deal when it's happening, and then 2 years later everyone's forgotten about it. Like I think what would make me most happy is if it still has some lasting value, in 2030.
Like when our kids are old enough to watch it and we show it to them, like I would, if they, God willing, enjoy it, like that would mean they and their friends enjoy it 10 years from now, like that would mean a lot.
Your kids are definitely going to like it. I don't know about Frankie. We'll see.
Well, as I close here, I have to say, I watched your talk yesterday in the pavilion, and I looked to my left, and there was the very young children watching a clip that you had that was quite violent. And I remarked to the woman next to me, I went like this, I said, look at the children. And they were rapt and with attention, especially one boy who had his hand like this and was staring at the scene. And the woman next to me said, I would never have my children watch this. It's just appalling. And I said, I think these children have seen this before. And the children got up, and I looked at the name tag. and the young man who was intently looking
Leo
was your
Weiss.
Leo Weiss.
That is a great story.
And
Thank you for that story.
I think he
Who
was
is that mother? Kind of irresponsible.
he was watching it
Yeah.
with a critical eye. He looks to me like he may follow in his father's footsteps.
Or he might become a serial killer.
One of the
One
two.
of those two. I'm rooting for the former. But yeah, they both. That's a whole. If you do a whole show on what you should and should not show children, and there's no right answer to it. But I think with them, they've been on set and they kind of seen how the sausage is made. So and there's a certain level of detachment from it, which I kind of hope they forget when comes time for them to actually watch the show, because I'd like for them to get lost in it the way that David was describing.
I didn't even know they were there until they were leaving, and my daughter was waving at me from the back, and I saw her, and I was just like,
Oh, you did see her? Yeah, I watched. She was desperately trying to get your
Yeah,
attention.
yeah.
I didn't see him.
We're at a writers' conference. Do the two of you anticipate? Both of you have written novels: Lucky Wonder Boy, City of Thieves. You've done adaptations of 25th Hour. What do you see your future in that arena being? Do you want to continue to write?
yeah, absolutely. Love to write another book.
Yeah. It's just right now, this is, especially with this show, it's such a totalizing effort that it's impossible to really think about the kind of in-depth thinking you'd need to do to write a book. It's just not. It's not possible.
That's
now.
both of your background is in that arena.
Yeah, which I think is a valuable thing for people adapting novels, because I mean, if nothing else, just having a certain sympathy for George's role as the creator and how hard it is to let go of you create all these little babies, and now we've kind of grabbed them and run away with them and are doing terrible things to them. And once again, I've got this extended metaphor that's just, there's no clear destination for it. But I think sometimes we can talk to George and just have a conversation that probably makes more sense to him, or we're better able to speak to him as people who have written books before, not just Hollywood creeps.
Well,
or only half Hollywood creep.
Yeah.
There's a lot of attention on STEM education now, but there's still a lot of room for young people to study the humanities, to study writing, to study the arts. I don't think this series would have been able to be made if you hadn't studied Joyce, if you hadn't studied Beckett, if you hadn't.
I like to think that Joyce would have liked this show. Maybe that's
probably more than Beckett.
Maybe that's hubristic of me, but I like to think it would have been the kind of thing that resonated with his concerns. He was a pretty dirty-minded fella himself. If you really want to go.
What are you saying? Yeah. He's also pretty egalitarian in his taste for
and he was,
music
and just the mythical quality of it. I would hope he would like it. We'll never know.
We will never know.
Maybe in a parallel universe.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much
for
taking the
us.
time to talk with me and our viewers watching about your series, and continued success to you, and we'll look forward to your next venture and adventure.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun. Thank you for having us.